If you've ever wondered why you have so much trouble staying consistent in your language learning, it's most likely not due to your lack of motivation, but rather due to not adapting your routine to when life gets in the way, and especially when what gets in the way in your life also impacts the energy that you can show up with in your language learning. Which is why in this video, I will walk you through the 3 energy phases that every language learner must go through and how to actually use them to your advantage so you do stay more consistent long term. Now, usually, and I don't fault anyone for this because I was the exact same way when I first got into my studies. When we construct our routines, we think about constructing what we actually want to get done in language learning according to ideally what we would expect from the day. So we don't usually account for life getting in the way. And then when it does get in the way, we assume that we failed instead of actually understanding that we're human and we're going to go through different seasons of different energy, right? We might also think that in order to truly stay consistent, we have to study every single day in the exact same way, which is also not realistic, again, because we are going to go through different seasons and different phases of energy. That is definitely not fair to ourselves when we expect so much from our time and energy limits that are very realistic as we are approaching this language learning thing as adults with outside obligations and also other hobbies. When we ignore those seasons, that is usually when our progress tends to break down in burnout, overwhelm, frustration. So once we understand what these seasons are, it can really help us to think more of in a cycle instead of so linear and feeling that we are just trapped where we are. So what are the 3 seasons that our energy is based off of? The very first one is what I like to call fast progress. So this is very visible progress. It is also the season where you probably notice that others are also noticing your progress. So you might get more external validation and praise in this season. And if you are making fast progress, usually you have more energy than normal. And also with fast progress, you're most likely doing a lot more output. For gradual growth, this is a season where you might see less quote unquote visible progress. You might get some external validation still in the season, but it also requires you to show up with really nurturing your own internal motivation and internal validation. But unlike the fast progress season, which is very output focused and very externally validating in a sense, this season has, I would say in general, more of a mix of input and output. It really gets you the time to sit back and reflect on zooming out of how you are actually doing when you are thinking about your language learning process, metacognition, right? Thinking how you think and mastering the skill of not always having tunnel vision on being so driven towards grinding towards a goal, towards fluency, right? This is a season that I have personally learned to treasure because it is also more sustainable, way more sustainable than fast progress is. And it gives me the time to breathe and step back more and reflect than I would if I were in a fast progress season. And in terms of energy, you have more of a steady sort of ebb and flow of energy. With restorative rest, our 3rd season, this is where we usually have low energy. And that might look like taking an entire break from a language or only doing input on a less frequent basis, let's say. When I was really learning a language pretty fast last year by going to a really immersive language experience abroad, I was definitely in a fast progress season. And I was incorporating all of these skills of input and output, right? Speaking, reading, listening, and writing. But I was producing the language so much because again, I also lived in the country. So I did have a great opportunity to practice speaking. But also whenever I slipped out of that fast progress season and I ended my language school experience, that's when I slipped into restorative rest because Again, fast progress is not sustainable, and I find that I have to have a restorative rest season in order to recover. So I did take a small break, maybe about 1 or 2 months, from the language that I was studying. And now I'm entering more into a phase of gradual growth where I can use a mix of input and output, even just like a 30-minute conversation lesson, like 2 times per month, plus doing some listening here and there, maybe reading a little bit from a graded reader in the language just to maintain it, right? So knowing that I have gone through all of these seasons, right, with one language, you can also think about going through different seasons actually at the same time if you are learning multiple languages. You can also stay in the same season for years in a certain language, for months, for days, or you can transition through all of these seasons even within the same day. But the fact is, it is a cycle. It is inevitable for everyone. So even the language learners that you really look up to, even though you think that they are making fast progress, that is simply a season for them. That is a season that is not only reserved for them either. I want to make that clear. You are fully capable of having that same season again and again and again. And because these seasons, right, are cyclical. They aren't linear, and it doesn't mean that you're going to stay in, a restorative rest season or gradual growth season forever, especially if you feel stuck, right? I know that the tendency is to feel that it's just a hopeless situation for us if we feel like we're stuck at a plateau for some reason, which is also more commonly felt in the gradual growth season, I will say. But fast progress is still always going to be available for you. It's always going to come back, as well as restorative rest. We are all human, and that's why these seasons are always going to be available for us, and we'll always cycle through them again and again. So how do we start working with all these seasons? It really first starts with assessing what kind of language learning activities have I been able to do according to my energy. So if I looked back and I remember making faster, more visible progress in a certain time in my language life, all right, what did I use as resources at that point? Who are my teachers? What kind of programs was I going through? Those are most likely high energy activities. Same thing for gradual growth. So a mix of input and output versus, again, our fast progress season where we are mainly focusing on the output, right? Because it is visible progress to others, but more internal validation and reflection mixed with some visible progress and external validation from others, right? We're getting that mix of input and output is something that or maybe even less frequent live classes that I would probably put under this category for myself, right? After I stopped being at the language school, literally talking like 4 hours a day, into just having a conversation class for 30 minutes 2 times a month. And then restorative rest. So when have you had lower energy in your language learning? Assess that for yourself. Assess what activities still felt good to do when you were taking a rest from a language or just doing maybe some input, but less frequently. That is how you start to train yourself into understanding how different seasons work for you. And by understanding and not only just thinking logically about them, but really internalizing them and understanding that we can be kinder to ourselves as we are going on this journey, that is absolutely a game changer for making your language learning more effective, more sustainable, and also ironically leading to faster progress. When we are able to slow down and reflect and work with ourselves and our energy instead of against, that's really when we see our progress skyrocket. If this seems a bit counterintuitive to you, then I understand what you are feeling, because at one point in my language learning, it seemed that if I ever slowed down, then that would just mean that I would fail, that I would never get fluent, that my whole routine that I had made and had spent so much time organizing in advance, and so just all of my efforts were for nothing. And it really got me into thinking in black and white. So when I really started to adapt to my seasons, I started to see more of the gray areas and more of the ways that there are pros and cons to every single season, and every single human, again, must face this kind of cycle in their learning. And that's actually a beautiful thing. Now, you can pick up either my language a la carte free training or or you can actually get both, the Language Learning Sustainability Planner in the comments below, where you can also track your energy for the upcoming week and also just make sure that your routine is sustainable for what you are planning to get done the rest of this month. And I want to say as well, you are the most important component of your language learning, and you will always be. So when you aren't doing well, then your whole language learning ecosystem, no matter if you have the perfect plan and all the resources, all the time and energy, if you're not doing well, then that ecosystem will not do well either, because it's all on you and taking your care of yourself and how you're doing emotionally, right? Your whole inner world, and really understanding that mindset is key, right? When thinking about how to have not only fluency, but long-term success and a fulfilling and enriching experience in language learning, to get all of that, you must meet yourself where you are instead of fighting against yourself. Again, I love to work with language learners one-on-one in order to truly master their language, but on their own terms. So if you feel that is something you are interested in, book a free discovery call down below and we can get to talking if you feel like you're the right fit. When all of these pieces line up together, that's really when your learning starts to feel less heavy, a lot lighter, and definitely more aligned to who you are as the whole person behind your languages. Thanks you guys for tuning into this video as always, and I'll see you in the next video soon.